My name's Sarah, and I've been working the night shift at St. Mary's General Hospital for 6 years now. 6 years of fluorescent lights that buzz too loud, coffee that tastes like it was brewed in 1987, and hallways that echo your footsteps back at you like they're trying to have a conversation. I'm a registered nurse, which sounds more prestigious than it actually is when you're dealing with bedpans at 3 a.m. and trying to convince a 90-year-old man that no, the IV drip is not trying to poison him. I work the 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift, which most people call the graveyard shift. Here at St. Mary's, we just call it Tuesday. The hospital's old, built in 1953, back when they thought asbestos was a miracle material and smoking was good for your lungs. The place has been renovated about 12 times since then, but you can still see the bones of the original building if you know where to look. The basement still has those old black and white checkered tiles. The elevator makes a sound like someone clearing their throat every time it stops on the 4th floor. And room 666, well, room 666 has always been room 666. Most hospitals skip that number, go straight from 665 to 667, like hotels skip the 13th floor. Superstition, you know, but not St. Mary's. The architects who designed this place had either a sense of humor or absolutely no sense at all. I didn't plan on working nights. When I graduated nursing school, I had this whole vision of myself working days, helping cute kids with scraped knees, maybe doing some community outreach. Real Florence Nightingale stuff, but day shift positions were competitive, and I needed the job. Night shift paid better anyway. Shift differential, they called it. Extra money for the extra weirdness. And there is extra weirdness. Hospitals at night are different creatures entirely. During the day, they're busy. Controlled chaos. Doctors rushing between rooms, families crowding the waiting areas, that constant hum of activity that makes you feel like you're part of something important. At night, though? At night, hospitals get quiet in all the wrong places and loud in all the wrong places. You'll hear a pin drop in the ICU, then suddenly someone's call light goes off 3 floors down and it echoes through the whole building like a fire alarm. The heating system kicks in with a sound like someone dragging furniture across the floor above you. And the lights never quite seem bright enough. I work the medical surgical floor, 4th floor. We handle everything from post-op recoveries to chronic care patients who've been here so long they know the night shift schedule better than some of the nurses do. It's a good floor. Not too much drama, usually. The patients are either sleeping or too medicated to cause trouble. Most nights, anyway. The thing about working nights in a hospital is that you develop a routine. You have to. Without the structure of a regular day-night cycle, your brain starts playing tricks on you. You start seeing things that aren't there, hearing things that don't make sense, so you create patterns. Check on room 401 first, then 403. Then 405. Always take the stairs instead of the elevator between 2 and 3 a.m. because that's when it gets stuck. Always warm up your coffee in the microwave for exactly 45 seconds because 30 seconds leaves it cold and 60 seconds makes it taste burnt. And you learn the rules. Every workplace has rules. Some are official. Wash your hands, check patient IDs, don't leave medications unattended. Some are unofficial. Don't eat the tuna sandwiches from the vending machine. Don't trust Dr. Morrison when he says he'll be right back. And never, ever schedule your break during a full moon because that's when all the weird stuff happens. But St. Mary's has different rules. Older rules. The kind that aren't written in any manual but get passed down from nurse to nurse like family recipes. The kind that sound ridiculous when you first hear them but start making perfect sense after you've worked here long enough to know better. These rules aren't suggestions. They're not guidelines. They're survival instructions. I learned them the hard way, through trial and error and a few sleepless nights that I don't like thinking about too much. But I learned them. And now I'm going to share them with you. Because if you ever find yourself working the night shift at a hospital, any hospital, but especially one as old as St. Mary's, you're going to need them. Trust me on this. Rule 1. Never work alone in the basement. The basement at St. Mary's is where they keep all the stuff that keeps the hospital running but nobody wants to think about. Laundry facilities, heating and cooling equipment, storage rooms full of supplies that expired sometime during the Clinton administration. It's also where they keep the morgue, though we don't call it that. We call it the temporary care facility, which sounds nicer but doesn't change what it is. During the day, the basement is busy. Maintenance guys, laundry staff, people wheeling around carts full of linens and cleaning supplies. But at night, most of that stops. The laundry runs on automatic cycles, the heating system does its own thing, and the morgue, well, the morgue is supposed to be empty except for the deceased. Supposed to be. I learned about this rule during my second week on the job. There was a problem with one of the patient monitors, kept beeping even though the patient was fine, and the replacement was supposedly in storage down in the basement. My supervisor, Janet, was supposed to come with me, but she got pulled away by some crisis in the ICU, family member having a breakdown or something. "Just grab it quick," she said. "Storage room B12, should be right on the shelf marked patient care equipment." So down I went. The elevator made that throat-clearing sound when it hit the basement level, and the doors opened to reveal a long hallway lined with those old industrial fluorescent lights that flicker just enough to make you blink a lot. The basement always smells like disinfectant and something else, something old and slightly sweet that I've never been able to identify. Not exactly unpleasant, but not quite right either. Like flowers left in water too long. I found storage room B12 without any trouble. The door was propped open with a rubber wedge, and inside were rows and rows of metal shelving units loaded down with medical equipment, supplies, boxes of things I couldn't identify. The patient monitor was right where Janet said it would be, still in its original packaging. That should have been it. Grab the monitor, head back upstairs, problem solved. But as I was reaching for the box, I heard something. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps coming from somewhere deeper in the basement. Which was weird because as far as I knew, there wasn't supposed to be anyone else down there at that hour. The laundry ran automatically and the maintenance staff had gone home hours ago. I stood still and listened. The footsteps continued, getting closer. They had a strange quality to them, not quite the sound of shoes on tile, but not barefoot either. More like fabric. Like someone walking in socks, but heavier. "Hello?" I called out, feeling stupid, but not knowing what else to do. The footsteps stopped. I waited for a response, but none came. The basement was dead quiet, except for the hum of the fluorescent lights and the distant sound of the laundry machines running their cycles. I grabbed the monitor and headed for the door, but as I stepped out into the hallway, I heard them again. The footsteps. But now they were coming from the opposite direction, back towards storage room B12. I turned around, and that's when I saw him. He was standing at the far end of the hallway, just at the edge of where the fluorescent lights gave way to shadow. An old man in a hospital gown, the kind we used to use back in the 70s, white with little blue flowers. He was just standing there, perfectly still, looking at me. Patients sometimes wandered, especially at night. Dementia, confusion from medication, general disorientation from being in an unfamiliar place. It happened all the time, but this felt different. "Sir," I called out, "are you okay? Do you need help getting back to your room?" He didn't respond, didn't move, just stood there watching me. I started walking toward him, but with each step I took, he seemed to get further away. Not moving, exactly, but the distance between us wasn't getting any smaller. The hallway stretched out like it was made of elastic. That's when I remembered something Janet had mentioned during orientation, almost as an afterthought. "Oh, and don't work alone in the basement at night. Always take someone with you." I'd thought it was just a safety thing, liability insurance, that kind of bureaucratic nonsense. But standing in that hallway, watching the old man in the outdated hospital gown, who seemed to exist at the wrong end of perspective, I realized it was something else entirely. I backed toward the elevator, never taking my eyes off him. The call button seemed to take forever to respond, and when the doors finally opened with that familiar throat-clearing sound, I practically dove inside. As the doors closed, I saw him one more time, still standing in the same spot, still perfectly still. But now there were others with him. 2 more figures in old hospital gowns, standing just at the edge of the light. The elevator carried me back to the 4th floor, and I spent the rest of the night trying to convince myself that what I'd seen was just my imagination, just the result of working too many night shifts in a row, just the fluorescent lights playing tricks on my eyes. But the next morning, I asked Janet about it. "Basement?" she said, not looking up from her paperwork. "Yeah, that's why we don't go down there alone at night. Too many former patients hanging around." She said it like she was talking about the weather. "Former patients?" "People who died here," she explained. "This building's been a hospital for 70 years. A lot of people have passed through these doors who never left, if you know what I mean. Most of them stay in their rooms, or at least on their floors. But some of them, they wander, especially in the basement." I must have looked skeptical because she finally glanced up at me. "Look, Sarah, I don't know if it's ghosts or residual energy or just the power of suggestion. All I know is that people who work alone in the basement at night tend to have bad experiences, so we don't do it. Simple as that. Since then, I've never gone to the basement alone. If I need something, I wait until someone can come with me, or I wait until the day shift can handle it. It's not worth the risk. But sometimes when I'm in the elevator and it makes that throat-clearing sound as it passes the basement level, I think about those figures in the old hospital gowns. I wonder how many of them are down there, wandering the hallways, looking for something they lost a long time ago. I wonder if they remember being alive. Rule 2. Always check the patient count before starting your shift. This one sounds like basic nursing protocol, and it is. You always need to know how many patients you're responsible for, their conditions, their care plans, their medications. But at St. Mary's, the patient count isn't just about medical care. It's about making sure reality is still working the way it's supposed to. Our floor has 32 beds. Rooms 401 through 423, though we skip 413 for obvious reasons, and room 666 is, well, room 666 is complicated. I'll get to that. On a typical night, we might have anywhere from 18 to 28 patients, depending on admissions, discharges, and transfers. The charge nurse always gives you a report at the beginning of your shift. Mr. Peterson, in 405, is post-op day 2 from a gallbladder surgery. Doing well, should be discharged tomorrow. Mr. Johnson in 418 is here for observation after a mild heart attack. Stable but cranky. Mr. Williams in 427 has been here for 3 weeks with complications from diabetes, family visits every evening, needs extra attention with blood sugar monitoring. Standard stuff. But every once in a while, the count is wrong. I first noticed it about 8 months into the job. Janet was giving report, going through the patient list room by room, and I was taking notes, making sure I had everyone's medications and care plans straight. "So that's 22 patients total," she said, finishing up. "Any questions?" I looked at my notes. I'd counted 23. "Wait," I said. "I have 23. Did I miss something?" Janet frowned and went through her list again. "No, 22. You must have double counted someone." But I hadn't. I went through my notes carefully, and I definitely had 23 patients listed. Room 401, Mr. Davis, post-op hernia repair. Room 403, Mr. Chen, pneumonia. Room 405, Mr. Peterson, gallbladder surgery, all the way down to room 431, Mr. Thompson, broken hip. And room 429, Mr. Garcia, admitted with chest pain. "What about Mr. Garcia in 429, I asked. Janet looked at me like I'd just asked her about the weather on Mars. "There's no Mr. Garcia," she said. "Room 429 is empty, has been empty all week." I looked at my notes again. I'd definitely written down Mr. Garcia, room 429, chest pain, age 73, admitted yesterday evening. I even had notes about her medications and dietary restrictions. "I must have misheard," I said, feeling confused but not wanting to make a big deal out of it. Janet shrugged. "Happens to everyone. Night shift can mess with your head." But as I made my rounds that night, I walked past room 429. The door was closed, which was unusual for empty rooms. We usually kept them open for housekeeping. I looked at the room number on the door, 429. Then I looked at the patient chart holder next to the door. It was empty, but I could hear someone inside, not talking, just breathing. The slow, steady breathing of someone sleeping. I stood outside the door for a long time, listening. The breathing continued, regular and peaceful. Every few minutes, I heard the rustle of sheets, like someone shifting position in bed. I should have opened the door. I should have gone in and checked, made sure everything was okay. That's what a good nurse would do. Instead, I walked away. The next morning, I asked Janet about room 429 again. "Still empty," she said. "Why?" I didn't tell her about the breathing, about the sound of someone shifting in bed. Instead, I made a mental note to pay more attention during report to make sure I was getting the patient count right. But it happened again 2 weeks later. This time, I had 21 patients according to Janet's report, but 22 according to my notes. The extra patient was Mr. Rodriguez in room 415, admitted with kidney stones. Room 415 was supposed to be empty. I walked past it during my rounds, and again, the door was closed. Again, I could hear someone inside. This time, it wasn't just breathing. Someone was watching television. I could hear the faint sound of late-night infomercials through the door. I stood there for 10 minutes, listening to someone flip through channels, occasionally stopping on what sounded like old sitcom reruns. The next morning, I asked the day shift nurse about room 415. "Empty all week," she said. That's when I started keeping my own count. Every night, I'd go through the entire floor before starting my rounds, checking every room, counting every patient. Not just the occupied rooms, but all of them. I'd peer through the windows of the empty rooms, make sure they were actually empty. Most nights, the count matched Janet's report, but sometimes, maybe once a month, maybe less, there would be an extra patient, someone who wasn't supposed to be there, in a room that was supposed to be empty, doing perfectly normal patient things like sleeping or watching TV or reading magazines. I never saw them directly. The rooms were always dark, and I never worked up the courage to actually go inside, but I could hear them. I could sense them. The weird thing was, they never caused any trouble. No call lights, no emergencies, no requests for pain medication or help getting to the bathroom. They were the perfect patients, quiet and undemanding. But they weren't supposed to exist. I finally asked Janet about it directly after about 6 months of keeping my own count. "Sometimes the patient count is off," I said, "like there are more patients than there should be." She looked at me for a long moment, then closed the chart she was working on. "How often?" she asked. "Maybe once a month. Sometimes I count an extra patient in a room that's supposed to be empty." Janet nodded slowly. "Yeah, that happens. Former patients mostly. People who were here for a long time got attached to the place. They check back in sometimes." "Check back in?" "Spiritually speaking," she said, "they're not causing any problems, are they? Not ringing call lights, not asking for medication?" "No, nothing like that." "Then just count them and move on. They're not hurting anyone, and honestly, they're less trouble than most of our living patients." She picked up her chart again, signaling that the conversation was over. "So that's what I do now. I count them. I include them in my patient total, and I make my rounds accordingly. I don't go into their rooms. That feels like an invasion of privacy, but I acknowledge that they're there. Sometimes I wonder what keeps them here. Whether they're confused or scared or just comfortable in a place where people took care of them. Sometimes I wonder if they know they're dead. But mostly, I just count them and move on. 22 patients tonight. 23. 21. As long as the math adds up, everything's fine. Rule 3. Don't make eye contact with the patient in room 666. Room 666 is at the end of the hallway, past the nurse's station, around a corner that always seems darker than it should be. The room number is painted on the door in the same standard hospital font as all the others, but somehow it looks different, more deliberate, like someone took extra care to make sure those numbers were exactly right. The room has been occupied for as long as I've worked at St. Mary's, 6 years, and I've never seen it empty, not once. The patient is always the same, an elderly woman, probably in her 80s, though it's hard to tell exactly. She never speaks, never calls for assistance, never seems to need anything at all. Her chart says her name is Margaret Holloway, admitted for observation. That's it. No diagnosis, no attending physician listed, no family contacts, just observation. I've never seen her medical records, and when I asked Janet about it once, she just said, "Mr. Holloway's been here longer than anyone. She's not really our responsibility." What do you mean? I mean, she's not on our census. Billing handles her directly. We just check on her occasionally, make sure she's comfortable. The thing about Mr. Holloway is that she watches you, not in an obvious way. She doesn't turn her head when you walk by, doesn't track your movement across the room, but her eyes follow you anyway. You can feel it, that particular weight of being observed, even when you're not looking directly at her. Most of the nurses on the night shift just ignore room 666 entirely. They walk past quickly, eyes forward, pretending it doesn't exist. But I'm thorough in my rounds, and I always check on every patient, even the ones who don't technically belong to us. The first time I looked directly at Mr. Holloway, I was 3 months into the job. It was around 2 a.m., and I was doing my routine checks. I knocked softly on her door and pushed it open just enough to peer inside. She was lying in bed, propped up slightly on pillows, staring at the ceiling. The room was lit only by the hallway lights spilling in through the doorway, but I could see her clearly. Thin white hair, pale skin that looked almost translucent, hands folded neatly over the blanket. "Mr. Holloway?" I whispered. "Just checking in. Do you need anything?" She didn't respond, didn't move. I stepped a little further into the room. "Mr. Holloway?" That's when she turned her head and looked at me. Her eyes were completely black. Not brown, not dark blue. Black, like looking into 2 holes in her face. And when she looked at me, I felt something shift inside my chest, like my heart had skipped a beat and then started beating in a different rhythm. The room got colder. Not gradually, but all at once, like someone had opened a freezer door. My breath came out in a small puff of vapor, and I could feel goosebumps rising on my arms. But the worst part was the feeling that she was seeing something in me that I didn't want her to see. Something private, something I'd kept hidden even from myself. It was like being X-rayed, but instead of bones, she was looking at my fears, my regrets, my worst memories. I backed out of the room quickly, closing the door behind me. My hands were shaking, and I could feel sweat on my forehead despite the cold I'd felt in her room. I spent the rest of the night trying to convince myself that I'd imagined it. The lighting had been dim. I was tired. It was just my mind playing tricks on me. People's eyes didn't turn completely black. That wasn't medically possible. But the next night, when I walked past room 666, I kept my eyes forward. And the night after that, and every night since. I asked Janet about Mr. Holloway's eyes once, in a roundabout way. "Has anyone ever mentioned anything unusual about Mr. Holloway?" I asked. "Unusual how?" "I don't know. Just anything." Janet was quiet for a moment. "She's been here a long time," she said finally. "Longer than anyone. Sometimes when people stay in hospitals too long, they start to change, adapt to the environment, become part of the place." "What do you mean, change?" "I mean, don't look directly at her," Janet said. "Don't make eye contact. Just check that she's breathing and move on." "Why?" because some things are better left alone. Since then, I've followed that advice. When I do my rounds, I knock on her door and peek inside, but I keep my gaze focused on her chest, watching for the rise and fall that indicates she's still breathing. I never look at her face. I never meet her eyes, but I can still feel her watching me. Every time I pass her room, every time I check on her, I can feel those black eyes following my movement, seeing things in me that I don't want seen. Sometimes, in the middle of the night when the hospital is at its quietest, I'll hear sounds coming from room 666. Not medical equipment. Mr. Holloway isn't hooked up to any monitors or machines. Just sounds. Soft scraping, like fingernails on fabric. Whispers that might be words but are too quiet to understand. Once I heard what sounded like singing, a lullaby in a language I didn't recognize. But I never investigate. I never open the door to see what she's doing. Because I learned my lesson that first night. Some patients are meant to be observed from a distance. Mr. Holloway has been at St. Mary's longer than anyone can remember. She's part of the building now, part of the night shift routine, part of the rules that keep things running smoothly. And as long as I don't look directly at her, as long as I don't meet those black eyes, everything stays normal. Mostly. Rule 4. If you hear the call light from room 425, wait exactly 3 minutes before responding. Room 425 has been empty for 2 years. I know this because I've been keeping track. The last patient in that room was Mr. Henderson, an 80-year-old man who came in with pneumonia and never left. He died on a Tuesday morning in March, just before the day shift arrived. Natural causes, peaceful passing. Nothing unusual about it except that he'd been asking for his daughter for 3 days straight, and she'd been dead for 15 years. After Mr. Henderson passed, room 425 was cleaned and disinfected according to standard protocol. New sheets, new pillowcases, fresh flowers in the bedside vase, ready for the next patient. But no one ever came. For the first few weeks after Mr. Henderson died, I assumed room 425 would be filled soon enough. We're always busy, always have patients waiting for beds, but weeks turned into months, and room 425 stayed empty. The door remained closed, the bed perfectly made, the call light button sitting on the bedside table like it was waiting for someone to need it. And then, about 6 months after Mr. Henderson's death, someone did need it. I was at the nurse's station, catching up on charting, when I heard the familiar bing-bong of a call light. I looked at the board above the desk, which shows which rooms have active call lights, and saw that it was room 425. That was impossible. Empty rooms don't have call lights. The system automatically disables them when there's no patient admitted to the room. I walked down the hallway to room 425 and listened outside the door. I could hear the call light chiming softly inside, the way it does when a patient presses the button. But I could also hear something else. Coughing. The same wet, rattling cough that Mr. Henderson had during his last few days. The kind of cough that comes from lungs filled with fluid, the kind that keeps you awake at night and makes every breath a struggle. I opened the door. The room was empty, of course. The bed was perfectly made, the call light button sitting on the nightstand where housekeeping had placed it. But the coughing continued, coming from the direction of the bed, and the call light kept chiming. I walked over to the bedside table and picked up the call light button. It was warm, like someone had been holding it. The chiming stopped, but the coughing continued for another few seconds before fading away. The room felt cold, but not in the same way as Mr. Holloway's room. This was a different kind of cold, sadder somehow, like the temperature had dropped not because something frightening was present, but because something was missing. I put the call light button back on the nightstand and left the room. The next morning, I mentioned it to Janet. "Call light went off in 425 last night," I said. "425's empty," she replied without looking up from her paperwork. "I know, that's why I'm mentioning it." Janet sighed and put down her pen. "Mr. Henderson?" "I think so, same cough." How long did you wait before responding? I was surprised by the question. Wait. I didn't wait. I heard the call light and went to check on it. Janet looked at me with something that might have been sympathy. Did you go in the room? Yes. How did you feel afterward? I thought about it. Sad, I guess. Cold, like something was missing. Yeah, that's what happens when you respond too quickly. Next time, wait 3 minutes. Why? Because Mr. Henderson is still trying to call his daughter, and if you respond too quickly, if you go in there while he's making the call, you might hear her answer. I stared at Janet, not sure I'd heard her correctly. What do you mean? I mean, Mr. Henderson spent his last 3 days calling for Margaret Henderson, his daughter, who died in 1998, car accident. He never got over it, kept expecting her to visit, kept asking the nurses when she was coming to see him. Janet picked up her pen again, but didn't start writing. When people die with unfinished business, sometimes they keep trying to finish it. Mr. Henderson is still calling for Margaret. And sometimes, late at night when the hospital is quiet and the walls are thin between this world and whatever comes next, sometimes she calls back. That's impossible. Is it? You heard the coughing, didn't you? You felt the sadness in that room? She had a point. The 3-minute rule gives him time to make his call in private, Janet continued. If you wait 3 minutes before responding, you'll find an empty room with a call light that needs to be reset. If you don't wait, what happens if you don't wait? You hear both sides of the conversation, and trust me, you don't want to hear what Margaret has to say about dying at 28 years old. Since then, I've followed the 3-minute rule religiously. About once a month, usually in the early morning hours when the hospital is at its quietest, the call light goes off in room 425. I note the time, finish whatever I'm doing, and wait exactly 3 minutes before responding. When I enter the room, I always find the call light button warm to the touch, as if someone has just set it down. The room always feels cold and sad, but not frightening, just lonely. I reset the call light, check that everything is in order, and leave the room. Sometimes, if I listen carefully as I'm walking away, I can hear what sounds like a sigh of contentment, like someone has finally received the phone call they've been waiting for. Mr. Henderson was a good patient when he was alive. Polite, patient, never complained about the food or the noise or the discomfort. He just wanted to see his daughter one more time. I figure the least I can do is give him the privacy to make his call. Rule 5. Never answer. Room 666. This is the big one. The rule that all the other rules lead up to. The rule that every nurse who's ever worked the night shift at St. Mary's knows by heart, even if they've never been told it directly. Never answer room 666. I know I said earlier that Mr. Holloway never calls for assistance, never rings her call light, never seems to need anything at all. And that's true. In 6 years of working at St. Mary's, I've never seen her call light appear on the board above the nurse's station. But sometimes, late at night, when the hospital is at its quietest and the walls seem thinner than they should be, the phone rings at the nurse's station. And when you answer, you hear Mr. Holloway's voice. It's not a voice you'd expect from an elderly woman. It's young, clear, beautiful even. Like a singer from the 1940s, all smooth jazz and cigarette smoke. But there's something wrong with it. Something that makes your skin crawl, even as you find yourself leaning in to listen. The first time it happened to me, I was 2 years into the job. It was around 3:30 a.m., one of those nights when time seems to move sideways and every shadow looks like it might be hiding something. I was sitting at the nurse's station, updating patient charts, when the phone rang. I picked it up without thinking. "4th floor, this is Sarah. Could you come to my room, please?" The voice was honey and smoke, vintage Hollywood glamour. "I need assistance." I looked at the caller ID display. It showed an internal number, room 666. That should have been my first clue. Mr. Holloway had never spoken before, never requested anything, never acknowledged that the nurses even existed. But I was tired, and the voice was so polite, so normal sounding, that I didn't stop to think about how impossible the situation was. "Of course," I said. "What do you need?" "Could you bring me a mirror, please? I'd like to see how I look." It was a strange request, but not completely unreasonable. Patients sometimes wanted to check their appearance, especially if they were expecting visitors. And Mr. Holloway had been in the hospital for years without ever asking for anything. "I'll be right there," I said. I hung up the phone and went to the supply closet to find a hand mirror. We kept a few for patients who wanted to brush their hair or check their teeth or just remind themselves what they looked like after days or weeks in a hospital bed. I found a small, compact mirror and walked down the hallway to room 666. The corridor seemed longer than usual, and the fluorescent lights flickered more than they should have. By the time I reached Mr. Holloway's door, I was feeling uneasy, though I couldn't put my finger on why. I knocked softly and pushed the door open. "Mr. Holloway, I brought the mirror you requested." The room was dark, lit only by the light spilling in from the hallway. I could see Mr. Holloway lying in bed, just as she always was, hands folded over the blanket, staring at the ceiling. But something was different. She was smiling. It wasn't a pleasant smile. It was the kind of smile that appears on faces in old photographs, formal and uncomfortable and somehow hungry. Her lips were too red, too bright for someone her age, and her teeth were too white, too perfect. And her eyes, I tried not to look directly at them, but I caught a glimpse as I approached the bed. Her eyes were no longer black. They were silver now, reflective like mirrors, showing me distorted images of my own face. "Thank you for coming," she said, and her voice was exactly the same as it had been on the phone. That honey and smoke tone that didn't match her appearance at all. I held out the mirror, trying to keep my distance. "Here's your mirror, Mr. Holloway." She didn't reach for it. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, still smiling that uncomfortable smile. "Could you hold it up for me? I'm afraid I'm too weak to lift my arms." That should have been my second clue. Mr. Holloway had never claimed to be weak before. In all my observations of her, she'd never shown any signs of physical limitation. But the voice was so persuasive, so reasonable, that I found myself stepping closer to the bed. I held up the mirror so she could see her reflection. She looked into it for a long moment, and her smile grew wider. "Perfect," she said. "I look exactly like I remember." But that was impossible, because the reflection in the mirror wasn't Mr. Holloway. It was a young woman, maybe 25 years old, with dark hair styled in finger waves and bright red lipstick. She was wearing a dress from the 1940s, black with white pearls at the throat. I looked back and forth between Mr. Holloway lying in the bed and the reflection in the mirror. They didn't match, not even close. "How ... I started to ask. "How long has it been?" Mr. Holloway interrupted, her silver eyes focusing on me with an intensity that made my stomach clench. "Since I've been here?" I don't know exactly. You were here when I started working." "And when was that?" 6 years ago." She nodded slowly. 6 years. That's not so long. I've been here much longer than that. The room was getting colder, and I could see my breath forming small clouds in the air. The mirror in my hands was becoming difficult to hold, not because it was heavy, but because it felt like it was trying to pull itself toward Mr. Holloway. "How long?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "Since 1947, she said. "I was 24 years old. There was an accident, a fire at the dance hall downtown. I was burned very badly, brought here for treatment." She gestured to her face, though her skin looked perfectly normal under the hospital lighting. "I didn't survive the night, but I was so young, you see, so full of life. I wasn't ready to leave, so I stayed. The mirror was definitely pulling toward her now, and I had to grip it tightly to keep from dropping it. The thing about mirrors, Mr. Holloway continued, is that they show the truth. Not what is, but what was. What could have been. What should have been. The reflection in the mirror was moving now, independent of Mr. Holloway's actual movements. The young woman in the 1940s dress was waving at me, mouthing words I couldn't understand. "I've been waiting so long for someone to bring me a mirror," Mr. Holloway said, "so I could remember what I looked like when I was alive, so I could remember who I was before." She gestured at her current appearance, the elderly woman in the hospital bed. "Before I became this?" The mirror was burning cold in my hands now, so cold it hurt to hold. The reflection of the young woman was becoming more vivid, more real, while Mr. Holloway herself seemed to be fading. That's when I realized what was happening. She wasn't just looking at her reflection. She was trying to climb back into it, trying to return to who she had been, to pull herself through the mirror and back into 1947. And if she succeeded, something else would have to take her place in the bed. I dropped the mirror. It hit the floor and shattered, sending fragments of silver glass across the room. The moment it broke, Mr. Holloway let out a sound that wasn't quite a scream and wasn't quite a sigh. The sound of something important being lost forever. The room immediately became warmer, and when I looked at Mr. Holloway, her eyes were black again, just like they'd always been. She was staring at the ceiling, hands folded over the blanket, as if nothing had happened. I backed out of the room, carefully avoiding the broken glass, and closed the door behind me. The next morning, I told Janet what had happened. She listened to the whole story without interruption, then leaned back in her chair. "You answered the phone when she called," she said. "Yes." "And you brought her what she asked for?" "Yes." Janet shook her head. "Sarah, didn't anyone tell you about Rule 5? "What's Rule 5? "Never answer room 666. Never respond to calls from Mr. Holloway. Never bring her anything she asks for." "Why didn't anyone tell me this before?" "Because most people figure it out on their own. Mr. Holloway doesn't usually call. This is the first time in, maybe 3 years." Janet opened a desk drawer and pulled out a small notebook. She flipped through several pages before finding what she was looking for. "Last time was March 2019. New nurse, just like you. Mr. Holloway called and asked for a photograph of her family. The nurse brought her one from the lost and found box." "What happened?" "Mr. Holloway tried to climb into the photograph, like she was trying to join the family in the picture. The nurse barely got it away from her in time." Janet closed the notebook and looked at me seriously. "Mr. Holloway has been here for over 70 years. She's not just a patient, she's part of the hospital now. Part of the building's ecosystem, I guess you could say. But she's not at peace. She's still trying to get back to her life, to her time. And sometimes when she gets desperate enough, she'll try to trick someone into helping her." "What would have happened if I hadn't dropped the mirror?" "She would have pulled herself through it, back to 1947. And you would have taken her place in the bed. You'd become the new Mr. Holloway, waiting for 70 years for someone else to make the same mistake." The thought made me feel sick. "So what do I do if she calls again?" "You don't answer. If the phone rings and the caller ID shows room 666, you let it ring. If she somehow gets through anyway, you hang up immediately, and you never, ever bring her anything she asks for." Since then, I've followed Rule 5 religiously. The phone has rung several times over the years, always late at night, always showing room 666 on the caller ID. I've learned to recognize the pattern. It rings exactly 7 times, then stops. If you pick up during those 7 rings, you'll hear Mr. Holloway's voice, honey and smoke and persuasion, asking for something that seems harmless but isn't. A mirror, a photograph, A music box, a letter from home, always something that connects to the past, something that might serve as a doorway back to her lost life. I've never answered those calls, but sometimes when I walk past room 666 during my rounds, I can hear her trying other approaches. Soft crying, designed to make me feel sorry for her. Calls for help that sound urgent and desperate. Once, I heard her singing, the same lullaby I'd heard before, but louder now, more insistent. I keep walking. I keep my eyes forward. I don't make eye contact, and I don't answer her calls. Because Mr. Holloway isn't just a patient anymore. She's a trap, waiting for someone to be kind enough, or curious enough, or foolish enough to help her return to a life she lost decades ago. And the price of that kindness would be 70 years of my own life, spent lying in a hospital bed, waiting for my own chance at escape. Some patients can be helped, others are beyond help. And a few are dangerous to help. Mr. Holloway is all three.